Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Cold Front, the 10th episode of Season 1. This episode was written by Stephen Beck and Tim Finch, and directed by our Tom Paris himself, Robert Duncan McNeil. It aired on November 28th, 2001. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
All right, here's my excited recap of Cold Front. While Enterprise joins an alien pilgrimage to witness a religious occurrence, Archer is confronted by a member of his crew, Daniels, claiming to be from 900 years in the future and causing him to face again the Suliban warrior Silik.
Okay, it's time to deploy our subspace transmitters and get into this episode. Abby, what are your thoughts on Cold Front?
Well, I have to say, any regular listener of this podcast will know that I am a fan of the cold open, and this one is another cool one. We see Future Guy, or the humanoid from the future, or whatever you want to call him. I personally like Future Guy, and I like that we're seeing some repercussions here. We're seeing those threads, those breadcrumbs from the very first episode coming back. And Silik is getting his enhanced eyesight taken out because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. The Klingons are still stable. Though I do have a question here. Why do we think that Silik is having his eye enhancement removal done in Future Guy's room? Because we know that there's a lot of time distortions and issues and things look weird and feel weird and sound weird in there. It seems like not the place you'd go for surgery. It seems like there's a lot of possibility for issues there. But then I thought to myself, okay, well, maybe it's because these enhancements or unenhancements are coming from the future and the people there are like riding the future waves from Future Guy to do what they have to do. Or I'm not sure how that's working, but I agree. We wanted to hear that dressing down from Future Guy and we wanted to see this happen. I just don't know why it happened, where it happened. There wasn't medical stuff in there and Broken Bow.
That is a good question, Abby. That's very intriguing.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting thing. And I would love to hear anybody's thoughts or feelings on it. So if you have anything that you can enlighten us about Future Guy's temporal waves, I guess, and if they'd be good for surgery or if they'd open up possibilities of future coming in, please let us know. We would love to hear that answer.
Good question. You know, I have to say, Abby, I really like this episode a lot.
Me too.
I'm excited to talk about this with you. And you know, those pilgrims who come aboard at the beginning of the episode, those are some sweet guys.
Yes, they are.
I found them to be very generous and gracious and kind, and they're giving up their fast to be courteous to Archer and appreciate his hospitality. I found them to be the anti-Captain Vanek from Breaking the Ice. And I just found them delightful. And that was a neat way to open the episode with Archer wanting to check out what was happening in the Stellar Nursery and get involved and show his hospitality. I thought that was all lovely.
I agree. I wrote down, it's so nice that they actually came across somebody who was welcoming and open and wanted to chat and talk and share experiences and liquor and astrolabes and all that. what a nice change from what they've usually run into, because these first few episodes, it did kind of feel like they ran into all the bullies of the Alpha Quadrant rather quickly.
Yeah.
And I think the whole Great Plume of Agosoria, I know that there's a lot of jokes that went around with it, but I think it's really nice. And I think that the discussion of faith and religion that was going on there is unique for Trek. Usually they're not as specific or detailed about it, but I really love how Phlox says all the different places he's went. And let me tell you, if I could add one 2-second thing to this episode, that would totally not work because it's just a joke. But when Archer was asked by one of the pilgrims, do you follow a particular faith? I so wanted him to say, I guess you can say I have faith of the heart.
I love that.
And every time I watch it, I think, please, I wish there was an outtake or something of that, because it was the perfect segue.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. That is perfect. Faith of the heart. Love it. I did think, though, that Archer's answer on the spot was really good.
Yes.
That was clever to think of that so quickly, and it made perfect sense.
I wonder if this is something he spent a lot of time thinking about previously. It seems like Archer might have had a moment where he was questioning and found something that soothes him.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. And I agree with you. I thought the part where Phlox talks about the different religions he's learned about and his experiences, that was also a lovely scene as well, and very interesting and very Phlox. I really appreciate Phlox's interest in the plume in this episode and how involved he gets in that. Later on, he even chants the invocation. So
yeah,
I liked Phlox in this episode a lot.
Yeah, I love that he asked to sleep over so he could learn more about them and see more of their ship. And I mean, this is a man, he's a doctor. He wants as much knowledge and information as he can get. And that's so cool, because he's kind of like the doctor and sociologist on the ship sometimes, just because of the experiences and the perspective he brings. And in that last part where the plume is actually going off and he's doing the chant, you can actually see Phlox get teary at the end. And it's so touching to see that he has made a connection with this species and he has found something meaningful, whether it be the same kind of thing that they were doing or not. But it was very moving to me to see him tear up.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I'm going to go back and look because I need to see that. Another part at the beginning of the episode here that I appreciated is Reed is coming up with another good idea when he says the tactical area should be off limits. He keeps coming up with these ideas that later are going to be more solidly adhered to. And I find it so interesting that he's thinking of these important things as we go along.
It actually says in my notes, Malcolm doing his job so well again. Yes! Because, he gets a lot of flack from people for being rigid and by the book and kind of overly paranoid. But you know what? That's his job. That's what he was picked for. And he's good at it. And he is showing, just like we're seeing the crumbs of the Federation and the Prime Directive coming in this first season, we see some of the protocols that are standard later coming because of Malcolm Reed. So we need to give the man some due.
Most definitely. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Daniels-Archer connection here.
Yeah.
When Daniels first admits to Archer that he's not who he thinks he is and that he's not even part of Starfleet, Archer handles it well. He stays cool. He asks the right questions. But I always think every time I see this, I'm surprised he doesn't call security or something, because this is pretty heavy duty.
Yeah, this is what we have Malcolm there for.
Right.
And it got me thinking later on in the episode as well, when Daniels tells Archer that there's a Suliban loose on the ship, he has at that point only let Trip and T'Pol in on all of this. So he calls Malcolm and goes, hey, Malcolm, there's a Suliban loose on the ship. You need to do da-da-da-da. And Malcolm just kind of gives one blink and goes, yes, sir. So how interesting that as soon as he calls, Malcolm doesn't ask questions. He's doing it. So this would have been a time to probably call and at least put someone outside the door.
Right. I mean, it all happened so fast.
Yeah.
If you're watching it for the first time, it's easy to be a little worried for Archer. Like, whoa, who is this guy? We know who he is, but it's pretty heavy information that he's giving him.
Well, especially since we've just seen Silik being the one who saved them from the warp core overload. So it is a little iffy. I mean, that's a great moment where you're like, he wasn't sabotaging, he was saving them. So you don't know whose side is the right one right away.
Right. And it's interesting because when Silik does start speaking against the other faction towards Archer, even though we know what the deal is, it is compelling. It does make you think in this episode, in this part of the series, it does make you question who's on our side. And I think they did a really good job of that because it is very ambiguous, I think.
I agree. And I think this temporal Cold War and the different factions are eventually going to be some of what impacts Archer's decisions later on with the sphere builders and the Xindi and having, somebody taking orders from somebody else. This is a theme in Enterprise. I mean, it starts in Broken Bow a little bit, but it definitely starts here.
Most definitely. And this scene in Daniel's quarters with the temporal observatory, the incredible visual effects, the history of time travel. We're getting some great backstory on laws, accords had to be formed. Here's how it all happened. Now we are looking at people observing Giza. All of that was so, for me, unbelievably fascinating. I loved that whole scene. That was brilliant and super intriguing.
I love the idea of a temporal Cold War. Now, I am personally a sucker for time travel stories in general, but this one, it was so well done, and it's nebulous, but gives you just enough so that you feel like you kind of know what's going on. It was like reading and hearing an FAQ or a 101 course of plot exposition about the temporal Cold War, and all you go is, wow, really? I want more of that. That's amazing. And yeah, that temporal observatory, I was blown away watching it in broadcast. And I thought to myself, this is the next step from the stellar cartography scene in the Enterprise D in Generations with the ribbon and Data and Picard, which I remember gasping out loud when I saw that in the theater, and then seeing this and going, yes, this is the next step. Look, it's like stellar cartography, but it's a temporal one. And so, yeah, that's an absolutely gorgeous scene.
Amazing. Just amazing. It could easily have been my Porthos pick. I love the way it looks. Love the backstory. Love the concept, like you said, of the whole temporal Cold War. All of that, super cool. And this was a great episode to explore that.
So let's talk then about the next part of the episode where we see Trip and T'Pol and Archer trying to figure out and deduce what's going on. I mean, this was our big three having a big discussion. I mean, that's a team. They're all being honest. They're all stating slightly different opinions. They're all being respectful. They're pushing each other, but it's not nasty. And it's so interesting because at the end, Archer's like, we just don't have time to sit here and debate this. I mean, he's listened to everything, he's taken it in, and he's made a choice. And that's what a captain needs to do. And now we know that Trip and T'Pol have such different feelings about it, even different than Archer, but they both just nod and go on and do exactly that. That's a team, that's a crew, that's our command structure right there.
Yep, absolutely. I had the same thought you did when Archer said there's no more time to debate this and he made his mind up. I really liked that also. He's definitely what a captain should be. We're done debating. Decision's been made. Let's do it. I totally agree. And you know what? It was a really good point when Trip brought up the point about the hologram that what Daniels showed Archer could have been faked easily.
Yep.
With that kind of technology at that point in time. So valid points were made. I love when Archer goes with his gut, though. Yeah, I like these scenes with the big three like that.
And I liked how it continued with the Trip and T'Pol just conversation going on there when he says, well, you're not believing any of this and, open mind. And then her quote, there is a difference between keeping an open mind and believing in something because you want it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
That resonates with me so deeply in so many ways in both Star Trek and real life and the world at large. That's a beautiful T'Pol moment right there.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
And it is the first time that she tells us, the Vulcan science director determined that time travel is impossible, which we know as Enterprise fans will come back again.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. How many times are we going to hear that from T'Pol?
And it was the first one here.
Yeah, that's funny. Can we talk about our beloved Porthos for a moment here?
Sure can.
I'm glad that we got some Porthos here. And oh my gosh, Porthos, first of all, detecting Silik and growling.
Mm-hmm.
That was fantastic.
He deserves some cheese.
Yep, he knew.
Yep.
And good conversation with Silik and Archer here. Very thought-provoking. When Silik shoots Archer and Porthos is whining and runs over to sniff his head, I can't handle it.
I know, it's a melt moment. And I want to talk about Silik in this scene because I love the small little bits of special effect that they do with Silik, especially in this scene. It's really noticeable. They gave him prosthetic teeth, and they gave him too many teeth to fit his mouth, so he always sounds like he's kind of chewing around a rock. But at the same time, they also just do this tiniest little technical distortion in his voice. So he sounds a tiny bit like machine or distorted. And I think that is so cool because he seems more menacing because it makes him just that little bit more difficult to understand. And I have to tell you that every time I hear him go, John, like he has extra vowels in that name and it's got the aw in the middle. I just get tingly because that is nobody else says John or Archer like that. Like he has a very specific way of getting our captain's attention. I do a very poor imitation of Silik.
No, that was good. I appreciate that observation. You're right. There are some nuances there with the sound quality. And I never knew about the teeth thing. I'm going to take a closer look at that. There are definitely ways that they make Silik stand out in that way. And John Fleck, who plays him, is so good.
Yes.
I love him in that role. Silik is a great character, really good nemesis for Archer.
He's someone you love to hate.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the whole Daniels and engineering scene that starts off the big action at the end here. The first part is Trip and Daniels having that conversation about, so you aren't really from Illinois and you don't really have a brother at Jupiter Station and all that. And I think it's interesting because you can tell that Trip is both impressed with this guy and totally annoyed that this guy fooled him at the same time. So he's trying to needle him a little bit, but at the same time, get some information out of him and see what he can touch and figure out and play with. It's a very interesting dynamic between the two of them.
Yes, it definitely is. I liked that scene a lot. We got a lot of backstory out of it too, because now I'm curious, Abby, which Illinois is he talking about?
Yeah.
What is Earth like in 900 years? And this is from another scene, but what does more or less I'm human mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So we got some good questions out of that scene. And I also found the part where Trip asks him about helping out with the betting pool.
Mm-hmm.
I found that part rather endearing. I liked Trip in that. That was cute and funny.
That was, and so was something that happened pretty quick after it. When Daniels goes through the wall to fix the junction, Trip and T'Pol give each other one of those looks that only people who've been through some stuff together and are realizing they're about to go through some more stuff can give each other. And it was half a second, but it was so perfect between the two of them.
Absolutely.
Then, of course, here comes Silik. He's already there. And I always think this is so interesting because they purposefully made Daniel's death, and I'm saying this in air quotes that nobody can see, obviously have an out to it immediately. Like you could see him messing with something on his shoulder and he got kind of fuzzy looking, and we don't know if that was the disruptor killing him or if he was jumping to another time. They left it very ambiguous, but very obviously ambiguous. And between that and some of the other moments in this episode, you know that this is the first part of a big story. And I think that's very interesting.
I agree. I love when series, how series have their mythology episodes kind of mixed in with the episode of the week episodes.
Yep.
This was a good Enterprise mythology episode because, like you just said, it leaves us with so many unanswered questions that we're interested about, some really intriguing stuff that we know we're going to find more about in the future. And that scene where Daniels dies is a great example of that. There was a lot packed in here.
Well, and I think it was also interesting how they interspersed Silik then throughout the rest of it when they're trying to find him and Archer's trying to catch up with him and he's going through and messing with stuff. The camera angles on this one, let's give some credit to Robert Duncan McNeill right now because it made it seem more tense, more cramped, more that anxiety producing feeling because they kept shooting the weird angles. I mean, and Silik is going to squish into whatever conduit he wants to squish into, which bums me out that it still doesn't get a new treatment because that is not CGI that holds up. It's an awesome idea and it just was ahead of its time visually. But I loved that. And I loved how Archer went and walked through the wall then because he had to catch up with Silik. And all of these little moments and quick cuts, the looks between different characters, the camera angles, the soundtrack, the lighting. This was a really neat sequence before that big showdown between Archer and Silik.
Very cool. I mean, just the walking through the wall with that device was incredible.
Yeah.
It's too bad that they lost it.
It is.
Speaking of that showdown with Silik, I thought that was shot really, really well. I thought the acting was good. The tension was good. Like you said, the direction from Robert Duncan McNeill was great. This was a cool, epic showdown between Silik and Archer. And when Archer is hanging there by one arm, that's, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Intense, tough, impressive since he'd already been shot unconscious and beat up in a Jeffries tube.
All of those things. Nail biter.
There we go.
They really amped up the tension there. The only thing I wish had happened was when he gets back and gets pressurized and you hear him gasping like that.
Someone to go, hey, what happened?
Yeah, somebody needed to say, are you all right, Captain? Are you okay? I kept waiting for that. Are you okay? No problem. I'll let that slide. Again, great acting from Scott Bakula. I thought that ending was really super cool.
I liked it too. And I loved how Silik also left us ambiguously because he does the famous, you may have endangered your future, John. And then jumps out. And yeah, I told you my Silik is not high quality, but it packs a punch when you say it with his accent or try to. But I think that is such a great way to end this chapter, but just leave you salivating for more again. This episode does that multiple times. And one of the things that I kind of hope for is that we know some things about 900 plus years in the future now that Discovery is in there. I'm kind of hoping that maybe the next season or two of Discovery, we see the Suliban and see if they're still there, if we get some resolution to this temporal Cold War. This is such a great storyline. Every time there's a possibility of having any more of it, I want it.
I feel the same way. And that is a really cool idea about Discovery. Wouldn't that be so neat if they tied that together? I would love it.
Well, they mentioned that, there are temporal rules now because of the temporal Cold War. So the possibility exists. I'm all for it.
Absolutely. And one more thing I just wanted to add about Silik's exit off of the ship, his grand exit. How cool is it that he's genetically enhanced where he can basically fly out of space and aim for his ship?
And get there.
And exit in that grand fashion. Mm-hmm. That was very interesting.
It's impressive, and it might be one of those hand-waving moments where you're like, oh yeah, genetic enhancements, and you just go with it.
Yeah, but what a way to end it. That was really cool.
Yeah. And one of the things as we wrap up our discussion here that I really liked about this is a whole cast episode. All our main characters have moments to shine. Some of our reoccurring characters have moments to shine. And even though it focuses mostly on Archer, I mean, we get the morning scene where you hear them talking about movie night and where you see what Archer's having for breakfast, which actually looks really good. And, then you have the parts about Phlox and the back and forth between Hoshi and Travis. Everybody has a moment in this one. And that is just really nice to see because we're only, between a third and a half of the way through this season, and we're getting more about our characters.
I agree. I love when they show daily life type of stuff on Enterprise.
Yeah.
So the whole movie night thing, conversation with Travis and Hoshi was really interesting. I also like to see Travis and Hoshi having conversations when they're not on duty and they're just being real with each other.
Yeah, you could read a book.
And then, of course, there's the infamous Enterprise salt shakers, where Archer's
Yes.
ringing the little bell there. That was cool. I really like to see a day in the life of Enterprise with them just having those conversations and going about woven into this heavy mythology episode. That was neat. Well, we've arrived at Porthos Pick, which is our favorite part of the episode. Abby, what's your favorite part?
Okay, this is going to be a little bit of a moment for me here. So the whole last minute and a half of this episode, starting from when T'Pol offers to help Archer with the report, and he says, in the morning, we all need a good night's sleep, goes out, tells Malcolm to lock the door. That whole scene till the end is perfection. The music that sounds a little bit like Jaws, that sense of impending dread, the looks on all the faces between the characters. There's not even any words after Archer tells him to lock it, but so much happens. And then that long pan on the lock at the end with just the blinking lights. This is the moment that I fell in love with Enterprise. I mean, I was going to watch it no matter what. I was a huge Trekkie, but this moment of this episode is when I went from, yeah, I like this, to, oh my God, I'm obsessed with this. It was so intriguing to me. It was so obvious they were going to go on with the temporal Cold War and that it was going to be a difficulty for the crew. I remember laying in bed that night and just thinking of all these possibilities of what might happen and what could happen and then what they might change and this, that, and the other. This is the moment I fell in love with Enterprise. So it couldn't have been anything else that I picked but this for my Porthos pick.
Oh, wow. That is cool. I appreciate that pick. I really love the way that shot with the creepiness and the music, that great music, and the camera. Yeah, that was very atmospheric, the way they ended the episode like that. Love it. And I have to say, whenever I see that, I can't help but think of one little tiny TOS callback, which is when Spock dies and they seal his quarters.
Yeah.
And they put that seal on. It reminds me of sealed quarters. Between the music and the camera and the no words, as you were saying, creepy and cool. My favorite part is when Malcolm puts Travis in command very briefly. I love that because, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, I like to see Hoshi and Travis having their regular conversations. And it makes you remember that while they are part of the senior staff here, they are ensigns. So this conversation where she's saying, oh, do you want to try out the chair and all of that? And they're all excited about it. And Travis says, ooh, different view from the chair here. And then when Malcolm comes back and says, permission to take my station. I love that. That was so funny and endearing. So I think that's my favorite part.
Oh, I think that's adorable too. And it's so honest and it's so what you would be thinking. And I love that Travis did it. And just having seen a little bit more of the boomers lifestyle in the last episode, I'm thinking they probably have some regulations about, not sitting in the chair until it's your turn and all that too. So interesting that he was so hesitant, but easily talked into it. And it's just our crew getting to know each other again. And it's beautiful to watch.
Accessing library computer data.
Okay, time to share some trivia. Abby, what can you tell us about Cold Front?
All right, I had two this time I could not choose between, and one of them's real quick. It's just saying that later on down the road in Enterprise, in the episode Dawn, Trip recalls seeing the Great Plume of Agosoria to Zokon while they're stranded on the moon, and I just think that's a nice connection within Enterprise itself to itself. But what I found the most interesting when I was researching this episode is this is Future Guy's only appearance in the series in an episode that was not a season premiere or a season finale. So that even puts more importance on this episode because otherwise they were saving Future Guy for the big ones.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. So this is the only one.
The only one that isn't a season premiere or season finale.
Very interesting. At some point on some episode, Abby, we'll have to delve into our thoughts on Future Guy.
Sure will.
My trivia is something I remembered from when I first got the Enterprise DVDs when they came out. I love all the extras that are on the DVDs. And I remember very clearly in the gag reels, in the bloopers, they have an outtake of John Billingsley messing up the invocation of the plume. And he just can't get the line right. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let people who haven't seen it watch it and enjoy it. If you don't have the DVDs, there's probably streaming of the gag reels now somewhere on YouTube or something. You have to see him mess that up. It is absolutely hilarious. So now when I watch the episode and see that scene, I always think of that.
That is absolutely hilarious. And I am not going to spoil it for anyone either, but I am going to second, go find this somewhere online because it is worth your minute and a half.
Transfer of data is complete.
Well, now it's time for our Vulcan's verdict. On a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, how do you rate this one, Abby?
All right, so this is probably not a huge surprise to anyone who just listened to me talk about this, but this episode starts one of my favorite long arcs in Enterprise. It has great character moments to all of the regular cast and the guest cast, and I want more after watching this episode. So this one gets a 9 out of 10 grapplers for me.
All right. I agree. This one is solid, really solid episode. It's a good mythology episode. We got some great informative and helpful information about the temporal Cold War, about this temporal observatory, about Daniels. We have John Fleck giving a great performance as Silik. Really interesting stuff. I gave it an 8 out of 10 grapplers.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
Speaking of Daniels, it's time for him to send us back in the timeline so we can share some of your picks. Abby, what do you have for us?
So I have one from the episode Civilization, and this is from one of our regular listeners. Michael loves the NHS at Michael Angie on Twitter. And he said, I always enjoy this episode, and I agree with Abby and Melanie about the costumes and designs. Always incredibly strong in this show. I especially love Rianne's laboratory with all its scientific instruments. And I have to say, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that in the episode, but I am completely in agreement with Michael on that.
Yeah, I'm glad he brought that up. That laboratory was really a lovely, lovely set piece. So thank you, Michael, for sharing that with us.
We love it when people who listen to us share their thoughts, so please keep them coming.
And if you'd like to continue the discussion with us, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And Abby, where can you be reached?
You can get me at Abby M. Summer, that's SOMMER on Twitter.
And you can find me on Twitter at ShuttlePod2, ShuttlePod TWO. We want to thank you for spending this time with us. And we'll be back next time with Silent Enemy, the 11th episode of Season 1. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.